Righto, is it fair to blame climate change for the recent destruction caused by bushfires across the country? Well, let's have a look at change in land use patterns over the last 50 years or so and see if that can provide some clues. Here we have Dunsborough in Western Australia, and I started going down there in the early 1980s. And the first time I went, I remember going down there, all of this stuff you can see here around Big Rock Reserve, this was just unpopulated bush. And what you can see now is it's speckled, there's like pimples or freckles all over it, where houses have sprung up since that time. And all this was developed, I don't know, 20 or 30 years ago. And you can see there's what you call a normal traditional suburb over here. And then the developer's gone and pushed some roads up, and then lots of driveways into the bush. And let's zoom in and have a closer look at this. Now, these are all really nice, tall gum trees. And I know that because I've been to drinks and stuff in some of these houses. They're fantastic, beautiful architect design places. I mean, these are some of the nicest places I've been in years. And you can see they're beautifully tucked into the bush. And in fact, our family rented a place like this at Margaret River early this year, and I've got to say it was brilliant. But I've always thought that if a fire ever gets hold in either Margaret River, in a similar development, or here, the whole lot's going to go. They're going to lose the whole lot. And why? Well, just have a look at how these places have been set up. Traditionally, if you're putting a house in the bush, you would clear a space, probably a fairly big space on your block, and you'd stick your house on it. Well, the way these developments have been done, and I don't know if this has been driven by the council or by the developer or by both, you can see these things are absolutely nestled into the bush, with trees growing over the top of these buildings. And look, if a fire gets in here, and this, you get a crown fire going through here, nothing on earth is going to stop these buildings being burnt to stumps. They're going to be absolutely destroyed. And this pattern of development repeats around all our cities on the urban fringe. The Blue Mountains around Sydney are probably worse than this. You look at any town up and down the coast where there's been people retiring or tree changing, and they're moving into these places. Now, prior to the 1980s, I don't think most people were wealthy enough, or there weren't enough wealthy people to afford to go and build these. I mean, a lot of these are holiday houses. Some people, have retired here, or they're working from down here. I went to school with a bloke who was a stockbroker, and he worked from down here for some time. These days you can get internet connection down here, and I could actually go and do my job from a house down here, which is something many people couldn't do a long time ago. It used to be you had to live in a suburb within walking distance of school and the shops and work and stuff like that. I mean, remember back prior to the 1950s, less than half of Australian families owned a car. So developments followed the railway lines, and they were fairly dense. We couldn't afford to do this really sparse development into the bush. And and this has really taken off, I guess, in the last 20 years or so. It'd be interesting to know how many tens of thousands of buildings have sprung up in bushland like this. And this is a eucalypt forest. I've been going through this for nearly 40 years, and I can tell you these are nice, big, tall trees. Healthy, lots of them, and even back then, when these houses were being built, it was said that there's going to come a day when this is all a ridge line across here, the whole lot's going to burn to the ground, and people have been saying that for yonks. So I would certainly not be surprised if that happens. And it's happening now. We're seeing the effects of it. These people are being told, get the hell out when a fire comes through, because we can't save your property, we can't protect you. If you stay, you're going to burn to death, because even if you've got a bunker, the heat load from all the fuel that's around here would be like being a pizza in a wood-fired pizza oven at a good Italian pizza restaurant, where it's 350, 400 degrees in the pizza oven, and you're gonna die. So you just have to flee. And we've seen that in California as well. They've got exactly the same kind of developments, again, up on ridge lines and up in the hills in eucalypt forests and other things like that, which are highly flammable. Now, if we cast our mind back to the 1940s, this is what Sydney looked like. I managed to find some aerial photography from that time, and this is how the suburbs or our towns used to develop out on the fringe. And you can see, new developments here pushing into what was probably farmland. And if we zoom down into these, you can see there's almost no trees anywhere. The deal back then, and really up until quite recently, was a developer would come in with a bulldozer and just flatten absolutely everything. And then you drop your slab down, stick your houses on, stick up some fences, then you plant some trees and shrubs, and hope 20 or 30 years later the place looks a bit greener. But you can see, there's just huge swathes of land where there's hardly a tree to be seen. And you can see there are trees showing up on the photos, but not in suburbia. And even if we go out a bit further to I guess to the edge, where can I actually find some where these are still farms in a lot of cases. And if we zoom in, can we actually find a farmhouse? Well, there's probably one there. Even out in the sticks, well, I mean, some trees there. Obviously, someone's gone and planted some trees along their driveway, but I think in a lot of cases, you didn't tend to have trees next to farms. And why would that be so? Well, when the settlers came through here 100 years before this was done, they would have cut down all the trees for the houses, because what else do you build a house of unless you got stone nearby, or you got convicts to make bricks. All the fencing before you had star pickets, well, you had to cut down the trees to make your fence posts. You wanted furniture, well, you had to cut down the trees. Before we had gas and electricity, how did you cook? How did you boil water? All those kind of things. Well, you cut down the trees. And look, when I was 12 years old, I worked on a sheep station that was miles from anywhere up north, and there was no power to the place. And if you wanted hot water, there was out in the front yard there was a 44-gallon drum over a wood fire, and you had to go and get an axe, chop some wood, build a fire, and boil water over that 44-gallon drum. So I certainly didn't have a hot shower for a couple of weeks when I was up there. Nobody did. And there was not a stick or a log anywhere within cooey of the house, because humans, when we want to go and get firewood, we go and get the closest firewood we can get our hands on. We're not going to walk further than we absolutely have to get some firewood. And okay, again, you can see some houses here out probably in the middle of nowhere, and absolutely no trees around them. And if we go back here, and let's just go east into what is still the farmland of this area, which was, they started clearing it, I think, after the First World War, the soldier settlers. And can we find some houses here? Well, you can see again, everything's been cleared. Oh, okay, here's a house. I guess that's a house. No, it's a shed. Okay, so they've put their houses in the trees, but certainly some of these blocks, the older ones, the house is out in the middle of the paddock, and whilst a grass fire might put the house at risk, there's no trees around it necessarily that are going to go up. Is that another shed by the look of it? Oh yeah, look, that's a house there. So yeah, you can see if all this was dry and it was there was lots of grass and the grass fire got into it, well, if you didn't protect the house properly and take the usual precautions, well, yeah, there's always a risk that the house could go up. And who was I talking to someone the other day in the rural fire service, and they lost a house because there was a grass fire and there was lots of grass around the gas bottles next to the house, and the gas bottles went up and they couldn't save the house. They just had to stand back and watch it burn to the ground. And they should have been able to save it, except for the grass around those gas bottles. But you can see here there's a massive difference in the fuel load around this house compared to what we saw in these tree changing dwellings, back over here. And if I go down to let's pull the Abra up. Let's have a look at Margaret River. Um, and in fact, many years ago, I had a girlfriend whose family developed some of this stuff here, and I remember, when they were developing it, it was they just um, uh, pushed a road through the bush, and people were plonking houses, etc., off that road. And you can see again, there's lots of these developments around here, and I've got to say these are again fantastic looking places, but um, we shouldn't be surprised if this place gets really crispy in a hot fire. So, did climate change lead to this changing pattern of development? And I'd say absolutely not. This is caused by changes in society, with society getting richer, um, and people being able to afford to live this different kind of lifestyle, which we couldn't afford to live, even 50 years ago. Climate change, yeah, okay, the trees have got more CO2 to feast on. The world is getting greener as a result. Therefore, you're going to have bigger trees. They're going to be faster growing. They're going to drop more leaf litter. Yeah, you're going to have more stuff falling on the ground. So 20 years ago, you might have had, I don't know, 4 tons to the acre of leaf litter falling per year. And these days, maybe you got 5 tons falling per year. You could blame that on climate change. But the question is, well, what the hell are we doing about it? Do we therefore need to, if we've got 25% more fuel being created each year, maybe we need to do 25% more fuel reduction each year. That's our adaptation to it. Maybe we just need to, instead of building with this kind of clearance around houses, maybe there should be this kind of clearance. And people will scream at that suggestion because it's going to mean cutting down a hell of a lot of trees. Yes, it is, but maybe that'll reduce the terrible results we have from our bushfires. Do we really want to ban all these hippies from tree changing? I guess they'd be the first person that would scream if we said, you can no longer go and live like this. You've got to move into town and live in a suburban community like this. Nobody wants to do that. So look, I like trees. I like living in a suburb which has got lots of trees and hedges. It adds a lot to the amenity of the suburb. It increases property values. It's nice to look at. It's better than living in a treeless wasteland. But we have to recognise that there's costs that come with that. There's risks, and and those risks have to be managed. We can't just blindly turn away from them and blame factors which have probably bugger all to do with it.